When we think about the Spanish Empire, one image often comes to mind: ships sailing across the Atlantic, their holds packed with gold and silver from the Americas. For more than 200 years, these treasure fleets fueled Spain's power, making it one of the richest and most feared nations in the world. Yet this same treasure, which seemed like an endless blessing, also carried the seeds of Spain's decline. The country became too dependent on the wealth from its colonies, neglecting the development of its own economy and institutions. Corruption spread, rivals attacked, and finally the colonies themselves broke free. At the center of this system stood the Casa de Contratación, or House of Trade, an institution created to control Spain's overseas wealth. Its story, and the story of the empire it tried to govern, shows how a great power can rise quickly, but also fall just as fast when it builds its strength on unstable foundations. The story begins at the end of the 15th century. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing under the flag of Spain, crossed the Atlantic and reached the islands of the Caribbean. His voyage opened the way for Spain to claim vast new territories. Over the following decades, Spanish explorers, known as conquistadors, invaded and conquered large areas of the Americas. Hernán Cortés defeated the Aztec Empire in Mexico, and Francisco Pizarro overthrew the Inca Empire in Peru. These victories were violent and destructive, but they gave Spain control over immense lands filled with resources. The most important of these resources were precious metals. At first, Spaniards sought gold, which was easier to collect in the Caribbean and Central America. Soon, however, they discovered rich silver deposits, especially at Potosi in present-day Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico. By the middle of the 16th century, these mines were producing more silver than anywhere else in the world. This silver transformed Spain. Ships carried it across the Atlantic to Seville, and from there it spread across Europe. Spanish kings used it to pay for armies, to build palaces, and to support the Catholic Church. Silver even traveled across the Pacific, from Mexico to the Philippines, where it was exchanged for Asian goods like silk and porcelain. For a time, Spain stood at the center of a global network of trade. The wealth seemed limitless, and Spain's rulers believed they could use it to dominate Europe. Spain controlled not only its American colonies, but also large parts of Italy, the Low Countries, and even the Philippines. The empire stretched across continents, and the crown believed it could command the flow of silver to maintain its power forever. To manage this wealth, Spain created the Casa de Contratación in 1503. Located in Seville, the Casa became the central office for all colonial trade. Every ship sailing to or from the Americas had to be registered with the Casa. Every cargo had to be listed, and every passenger had to be approved. The Casa collected taxes on trade, especially the Royal Fifth, a 20% tax on all gold and silver. It kept official maps and trained navigators. It was supposed to make sure that Spain's colonies remained tightly connected to the crown, and that no foreign power could gain access to the riches of the New World. The system was strict. Colonies were forbidden from trading with other nations, and all commerce had to pass through Seville under the Casa's supervision. To protect the treasure itself, Spain developed the system of annual fleets. Ships carrying silver, gold, and other valuable goods from the Americas would gather in ports such as Veracruz in Mexico or Cartagena in Colombia. They would then sail in large convoys across the Atlantic, escorted by warships. These fleets reduced the risk of attack and allowed the Casa de Contratación to monitor the arrival of treasure in Spain. At first, the system worked fairly well. Spain appeared to have found a perfect way to organize and control its empire. For decades, the Casa de Contratación stood as one of the most important institutions in Europe, directing the movement of goods and wealth across the Atlantic. Yet problems soon became clear. The flow of silver and gold was so great that it began to cause economic trouble. Because Spain had easy access to wealth from the Americas, it did not develop a strong industry at home. Spanish nobles and officials often preferred to spend money on luxury goods imported from other countries rather than encouraging local production. As a result, Spain's economy remained weak and dependent. At the same time, the flood of silver caused inflation. Prices rose across Europe, reducing the value of money. This period of rising prices is known as the Price Revolution, and it hurt ordinary Spaniards who struggled to afford basic goods. While silver enriched bankers and merchants, many Spaniards saw little improvement in their daily lives. Corruption also became widespread. The Casa de Contratación was supposed to regulate trade, but its officials were often bribed. Smuggling became common as merchants tried to avoid taxes. Colonial officials in the Americas frequently ignored the rules, trading secretly with foreigners who offered better prices than Spanish merchants. This undermined the Casa's control and reduced the crown's income. Meanwhile, foreign rivals learned about the treasure fleets and began to attack them. English captains such as Francis Drake, as well as French and Dutch privateers, targeted Spanish ships and ports. Even with convoys and escorts, many fleets were captured or destroyed. Spain's enemies grew stronger, and they began to challenge Spanish power on the seas. Another major problem was Spain's constant involvement in wars. Kings such as Charles Themshim and Philip II believed they had a duty to defend Catholicism and to expand Spanish influence in Europe. They fought wars against Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, against France, and against England. These wars were extremely costly. Even with silver flowing in from the Americas, the Spanish crown often spent more money than it received. Time and again, the monarchy was forced to declare bankruptcy. The treasure that was supposed to secure Spain's greatness often ended up in the hands of foreign bankers who lent money to the crown. Instead of strengthening Spain's economy, much of the silver was drained away to pay debts. By the 17th century, the weaknesses of Spain's system were obvious. The Casa de Contratación struggled to maintain its monopoly on trade. Smuggling and corruption undermined its authority, and the colonies themselves grew frustrated with the restrictions. The treasure fleets became less reliable as pirate attacks increased, and Spain's navy weakened. Inflation continued to hurt the economy, and wars drained resources. Spain was still a great power, but it was no longer the unstoppable force it had been in the 16th century. Rivals such as France, England, and the Netherlands rose in strength, while Spain fell into decline. In the 18th century, some attempts were made to reform the system. The Casa de Contratación was moved from Seville to Cadiz in 1717, partly because Cadiz offered a better harbor for larger ships. Yet the deeper problems were not solved. Smuggling continued, and Spain still depended too heavily on silver. Corruption remained widespread. Finally, in 1790, the Casa de Contratación was abolished. By then, it had become a symbol of inefficiency rather than strength. Its disappearance marked the end of an era in which Spain had tried to control its empire through a single institution. The final collapse of the empire came in the early 19th century. Inspired by the American and French revolutions, colonies in Latin America began to demand independence. Leaders such as Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín led movements across South America, fighting wars that eventually freed most of the continent from Spanish rule. By the 1820s, Spain had lost nearly all of its American colonies. The mines that had once filled Spain's treasure fleets were now out of reach. The empire that had been built on silver and gold crumbled, leaving Spain as a weakened power in Europe. Looking back, the rise and fall of Spain's empire teaches an important lesson. Wealth alone is not enough to sustain power. Spain's rulers believed that endless treasure from the Americas would guarantee their greatness, but they failed to build a balanced economy or effective institutions. Instead of investing in industry or supporting innovation, they relied on imports and loans. The Casa de Contratación, designed to control the empire, became corrupted and inefficient. Wars drained resources, and rivals grew stronger. When the colonies finally broke away, Spain was left without its main source of wealth, and its empire quickly collapsed. The story of the Casa de Contratación and the treasure fleets is therefore not just a story of riches and glory. It is also a story of mistakes, overconfidence, and decline. Spain had the chance to use its wealth to build a lasting foundation of strength, but instead it allowed greed, corruption, and short-term thinking to undermine its power. By the time the colonies gained independence, Spain's golden age was already long gone. The empire that once seemed unshakable became a memory, a reminder that no amount of silver or gold can preserve a nation that fails to build wisely for the future.